Jason Levesque is guilty of attempted murder and first-degree assault for firing 6 rounds of 9mm ammunition into Kyle Violette's body. This in response to Kyle warning, if you take Jason's term, a threat not to put snow in front of Kyle's driveway. That the defendant responded to Kyle's words with lethal, deadly violence, responded to a hollow threat over pettiness, a petty grievance with that kind of violence is the crime here. Let me be a little bit more specific about this criminal act. After Kyle said his words, even a threat, he stepped away. And the defendant brought out a firearm and pointed it at Kyle. Kyle could clearly see the firearm. There's no lighting issue, no lighting problem. The headlights of the vehicle were on, street lights were on, house lights were on. The weapon was clearly visible to Kyle, and he responded. He responded by turning away from the defendant, back towards his home. And as he turned away, from about 10, 15 feet away, the defendant fired. First round ripped through Kyle's jaw, his face, breaking both mandibles, lodging near his carotid artery. And it caused him to immediately drop to the ground, facing away from the defendant, now facing towards his home. And after that first shot, it's about a 5-second pause, a delay, where the defendant advanced on him, walked towards him. Kyle is literally crawling on his hands and knees, on his belly, leaving a blood smear across the road diagonally towards his house. The defendant opened fire. 5 more shots into the back part of his body, into the side of his body as he jerked and twisted on the ground, crawling away to try and get to safety. That's the criminal act. Each of those 6 bullets caused either maiming or potentially lethal or actually life-threatening injuries. Kyle Violette lived by sheer luck and the immediate intervention of some very sophisticated and effective medical care. First, from an officer who was highly trained in the military, responded within minutes and helped stem the bleeding. An EMT with heightened training, a paramedic, took over from there. 3 separate hospitals, Frisbee, then transferred to Portsmouth, then transferred to Boston for the intensive medical intervention that was required, is what saved Kyle's life. And so, to be clear about this, the evidence will show Kyle didn't die for his lack of trying, but because of medical intervention. Let me talk then, just briefly, summarize this issue. The evidence will show that no, there was absolutely nothing to justify what was nearly an execution in the street out in front of Kyle's home. That's because the defendant wasn't responding to a reasonable belief, reasonable evidence that Kyle was about to imminently use deadly force against him. And let me be clear, this proposition, this law, will come from the judge, not me, and it's not merely legalese, some hyper-technical statement, we gotcha for this action. This is a principle, a guardrail that we all live by, that restrains violence in our community, in our state, and should have in this case. Retribution, getting angry about somebody's scary words, is not the same thing as self-defense. That is another guiding principle in this particular case. You're going to hear more specifically about these words. And these words are unsettling according to Jason. Jason has claimed that Kyle came out angry. Angry about where Kyle expected Jason to plow, push, deposit a pile of snow. And according to Jason, Kyle used offensive, threatening, and scary language. Bear with me, I'll quote Jason's claim. This, he claims, was verbatim. If you leave that snow in front of my driveway again, I'll kill you and your family. That's what Jason claims he said. But in this fleeting, and I mean the confrontation that starts this is about 3 to 4 seconds of these words. In that confrontation, Kyle was never armed. He never appeared to be armed. He never brandished a weapon. Never hinted that he had a weapon or claimed that he had a weapon. There was no imminent threat of actual deadly force married to, even if you accept those horrible words. Those are the core issues. Those acts of coming up behind him, standing over him while he's on the ground, having shot him in the face, and putting 5 additional rounds into his body, in contrast to the facts about what he was actually facing. That's this case. And let me now, if I could, talk to you about some background and some more detail about how it is we got here. He just went out to their homes. They had been neighbors for about 1.5 years. As I mentioned, I think in the previous statement, that the Violettes lived at 43, the one as you face the houses to the left. Kyle, yes, the victim, lived there with his partner of some 22 years, Angela, and Kendra, who was 17 at the time. His daughter kind of split some time for educational reasons, and a son who need not be named here because he didn't witness anything. Next door, 41, the Levesques. Jason's parents lived downstairs, and Jason lived with his daughter, Kira, 19 at the time, in the building, in the home to the right as you face it from the street. And we heard a little bit about this, that on April 4th of 2024, last year, we got a doozy, a snowstorm, some 18 inches, the heavy wet stuff. Big deal, right? Well, Jason was out plowing. It's one of the jobs he had. He plowed all day. He had essentially been plowing for about 24 hours, working for about 24 hours. And he stopped on the way home to pick up his daughter, who was working at a local pizza place, 9:30, 10 o'clock, to bring her home. And when he arrived home, with Kira still in the vehicle in the passenger seat, he did a couple of runs in front of the house with his plow. He first went up the street, did a run across and removed some snow in front of his driveway, and then he turned around and did probably 3 or 4 runs towards Kyle's home, towards 43. And it created a pile of snow next to that telephone pole that was pointed out to you, all right? But while this was going on, while Jason was plowing, Kyle's looking out the window, that bay window that we pointed out, and he sees the plowing activity going on, and he sees the pile of snow by the pole, and he sees the defendant, Jason, stop his truck, which is an older style big rig plow, where in order to put it in a 4-wheel drive, he's got to get out and manually turn the switch on the front wheels. And so there's this break in the plow. He knows, Kyle knows, that Jason is going to go down the driveway and back plow more snow out. And based on the last snowstorm, where he put it in front of his driveway and he had to deal with it, he was angry. He anticipated that Jason was going to push the whole pile because it had been set up and cleared in front of his driveway. And he was going to have to get out there and basically do it himself. And so he goes outside. We see this on video based on this prior incident where he had, in fact, asked him, hey, can you move this stuff? Here, according to Kira, his daughter, who was interviewed, her account of it was, yeah, they asked us to move it last time, but we didn't do it. After all, snow melts. And that didn't sit well with Kyle. So he goes out and to confront Jason about this situation. And here he goes. We can see him in the video, walking out rapidly, putting on a hoodie as he goes. You can see from there, he's not armed, other than being angry. You can see by maybe his pace, he's annoyed. And all of a sudden, because he's gone out, Angela and Kendall, the Violette daughter, look out that bay window too and watch much of this go down. And as Kyle walks out putting on his hoodie, he approaches Jason, who's at the truck. He's kneeled down by that hubcap, behind the plow, but just in front of his door. His daughter remains in the car, briefly steps out. And here's the thing, as Kyle approaches, his hands are out. And Jason admits he can see his hands. He's not armed. And on the walk over, he makes no gesture like that he's packing anything. His hands are visible. And he approaches, and according to Jason, Kyle makes this claim. If you put that fucking snow on my property, I'm going to fucking kill you and your family. That exchange is face to face, right at the plow. You'll be able to see it from multiple angles. During that 3-second encounter, Kyle doesn't display a weapon, doesn't hint he has a weapon, doesn't claim he has a weapon. If you put that, I'm going to use this, that, or any other weapon to carry out this threat. It's words. After this 3 to 5 second exchange, time it, judge it for yourself, it's on video. Kyle walks away. He steps about 15 feet back. You can kind of assess that measurement because from the back driveway forward, just past that evergreen, you'll see Kyle still in view from all the way back of the driveway of 41. And so if you took kind of an eyeball measurement, it's about 15 feet from the corner of that fence to the angle of the evergreen. And that's about where he's standing. And you can see him in the video gesturing to the snow. That driveway, my driveway, and he's doing that kind of gesturing. The video audio doesn't quite pick it up, but you know he's talking about snow not going over there. And at some point during this pointing and gesturing, he stops and walks back towards his house, kind of pacing. He's certainly agitated. But he then takes a turn back. He walks probably 4 steps back towards Jason, still kind of gesturing. Still, no weapons visible, nothing to suggest he was armed, that he obtained a weapon, that he was holding a weapon, that he claimed he had a weapon. And as he walks back, he reaches a distance of approximately 15 feet away from Jason. And it's at this point that Jason steps away from his truck and forward, closes the distance to him slightly, and raises his firearm and points it out. He brandishes it. And guess what? It did what you would hope it would do. Kyle stops. You can clearly see that right at the edge of that pine tree. You can see him emerge and then step back. And it's at this point, there's a pause between brandishing the firearm because there's sufficient distance that nothing happens. Not long, but enough to see Kyle stop and turn away. He has been warned. He's received the warning, and he's responded appropriately. He's turned away. But from this two-hand stance, despite Kyle stopping, despite him turning back to his home, Jason Levesque fires. I told you it strikes him in the face, penetrates from the left to the right, smashing through his jaw, his teeth, lodging next to his carotid artery. He goes down. And you'll have a sense of where he goes down, not from the videos, but from body cam of police officers showing up. You'll be able to see in various sweeps of body cam the blood distribution on the ground, where it starts, just the other side of that white line, and it drags diagonally towards Kyle's home. Kyle's clearly on the ground now, obviously incapacitated. He's not getting up, he's not bum rushing the defendant. He's on the ground now with a very serious injury. The hemorrhaging is going into his throat. Later has to be cleared by EMTs. They have to literally turn his body on its side to drain his throat. And yet, the collection of videos will show that despite this situation, Jason advances, takes multiple steps towards him. As he's on the ground, he's beginning to crawl on his belly, his hands and knees. You see these videos where he unloads 5 more rounds, all of them striking his body. Kyle is able to crawl, 10 more feet, right about at that pole on the sidewalk. So he's come off the road at an angle, and he basically curls up. And I told you that Kendra and Angela were watching from Violette's window. They obviously, when they see the first shot, they start rushing out, and they meet him as he on the ground. And everybody starts calling 911. I mean, Angela, Kendra, other neighbors who have heard these rounds go off. And I don't know if you noticed how close this address on Summer Street is to Rochester PD. We'll hear testimony about it if you didn't, but it's just around the corner. And Rochester PD responds with multiple units in minutes. They get there. And here's where the paths from this event, for Kyle Violette and Jason Levesque, deviate. You've heard about this awful intersection. Now they split. And here's what happens with Kyle. He is launched on the path of a medical odyssey that hasn't ended. And I want to be clear about this. You will see evidence, graphic evidence of these injuries. You'll see body cam images of treatment. You'll see photos from the hospital, and you'll hear detailed accounts. And I want to assure you that the reason is not shock and awe to offend you, to provoke you to reach a certain verdict, to trigger your passions. It's this. This medical evidence is relevant to show, to prove his deadly intent. The repetition, the location, the nature of a 9mm bullet ripping through somebody's body is relevant to show intent to kill. That's why it's coming in, and it will come in. And so let me just foreshadow this. You will see and hear from a guy named Sergeant Williams Hurley, who was a combat medic overseas and has some real specialized training in triaging on the street. You'll see him do his thing. He cuts Kyle's clothes off. He is identifying gunshot wounds and doing compression bandages to stem the flow. He's the one who realizes he's literally choking on his blood and tips him over to drain his throat. He's the one who takes over on the scene. And the next person who arrives is this EMT, an actual paramedic, also with prior military and intensive training in acute trauma and triage. And she makes the decision, this guy needs to leave and leave now. Hurley says, if things didn't happen quickly, this man is going to die. And so they take him from the scene rapidly in a ambulance to the closest facility, a community hospital, perhaps most of you are familiar with, Frisbee Memorial. And there a guy named Dr. Freeze starts to perform medical services as well. And he does a quick assessment of these gunshot wounds. They do some things there, primarily pumping in enormous amounts of blood. But they quickly reach the conclusion that these are life-threatening injuries, that there are diffuse bullet fragments through the body, that there are injuries, candidly, that they're not capable or confident about addressing. So they immediately, or very quickly, emergency evacuate him to our community higher level of care facility, which is Portsmouth. At Portsmouth, another doctor takes over, and in similar fashion, they assess, they do a surgery. I told you about some of these injuries, the bullet going through his face, breaking his jaws, but also landing near and dissecting part of his carotid artery. That he's shot, I told you, from behind. 2 wounds are literally in his buttocks, his back, that go through and penetrate partially his pelvic area, and also one is suspected of rupturing his bowel. So they do kind of this emergency surgery at Portsmouth. Look, it's graphic, but one of the bullet literally just obliterates his left testicle. It causes serious hemorrhaging. They have to do surgery, remove it, and stem the bleeding. They do that at Portsmouth, but they quickly conclude that if he doesn't get more emergent care, he'll likely die there. So they medevac him to Boston, and you will hear the summary. I don't want to belabor these issues. I point them out to show the seriousness, not just of injury, but intent. And so you're going to hear more about the injury to the clavicle, to the abdomen, to the enormous amount of bleeding and damage that was done internally. And That's for you to assess, not just the criminal acts, the criminal intent in this case. That's pretty much Kyle's journey. He's in the hospital down in Boston for about a month, discharged to home in the condition he was, which you'll hear about. Jason, at the same time that I told you people were literally descending on Kyle's prone body to save his life, there's another part of the reaction from the police, not surprisingly, that focuses on Jason. So let's go back to that scene right after the shooting. He finishes up with 5 rounds into Jason's essentially back and side as he's twisting. And then he takes a gun and he walks away, walks back to his truck. You're going to hear evidence about Jason's path. It's a different path. It's one he takes where he attempts to evade accountability, escape responsibility by recasting Kyle's actions to sound like he engaged in imminent, deadly behavior, that he created an imminent threat to his life. But you're going to hear evidence in more detail in this regard. Let me first share with you that Jason returns to his truck, which is still parked out in the street, the edge of the sidewalk. And his daughter has returned, has gone. She was only briefly outside when this whole thing happened. She got back in the truck, understandably, and witnessed much of this. And she'll tell you that when Jason got back into the truck, he turns to her and says, "Should I run now?" He turns to his 19-year-old and says, "Should I run?" Not like, I defended myself, did what I had to do. It's, should I run? His daughter, his 19-year-old, turns to him and says, "No." He says, "Well, what should I do?" She says, "This is your path. I don't know. Should I call 911? I don't know what you should do." And so he doesn't call 911, pulls into the driveway and waits. He certainly doesn't have to wait long. Sirens have been going on now. Lights are on. It's around the corner. And the police come in and they do take him into custody. And he cooperates, seemingly, physically, sure. He puts the gun in the car. He steps out. He seems polite and cooperative. But here's what happens next. A guy named Detective Garston and Flathers take him back to Rochester PD. They take him up to an interview room. And they don't know what's going on yet. When they first get on the scene, they don't even know who the shooter is or who's injured. They didn't see Kyle initially. He's over by that pole. That's how kind of uninformed they are. And so they bring him back and just kind of say, "Well, tell us, what happened?" And he describes much of what we've already talked about. He says that, look, I'm plowing, I'm minding my own business, I'm in front of my home, and I'm with my daughter, and out comes my neighbor, and he, while I'm doing the four-wheel drive thing, he comes up and nose to nose, and he repeats this. He's very clear on this, that the threat is conditional. Hey, if you move this over there, I'm going to fucking kill you. There's no doubt that this was conditional, and those are the words that were said. No doubt that they were unsettling and grossly inappropriate. But what he also told the police is, no, I didn't see a weapon. He didn't take out a weapon, and he didn't claim to have a weapon. But this is what he claims next. That Kyle turned away after that and walked back to his house. But then for whatever reason, he turned back and he looked really angry. He looked like he was going to come and fight me, had his fists on, and just the look in his eye, I knew he was going to attack me. Then he says, That's why I pulled the gun out. Okay, fair. By the way, legal. Well, what happened after you pulled the gun out? Did you go towards him? No, I never closed the distance. Well, what did he do? This is what he claimed. He quickened his pace. Kyle, once he saw the gun, started rushing at me. He quickened his pace. And I could tell in his eyes it was you or me. I could tell he was going to come over and take the gun. He was more aggressive. He was going to hurt me. He was going to take the gun. That's what he claimed to the police. This is after he pointed the gun at Kyle. That's the claim. Oh, and he continued to come at me in such an aggressive fashion that then I had to fire the gun. And he admits to shooting Jason. He said, I hit him. And after I fired the gun, Jason says, I turn around back towards my truck. But I look back, and Kyle, despite being hit, he's not even fazed. Hasn't flinched. He's now continuing after me again, and I feel frightened. I feel like he's going to attack me because he's still on his feet. Shot didn't seem to stop or hurt him. Might have flinched because of the noise. That's why I fired the rest of the shots, he says. I fired the shots into his lower body as he approached me, and only then did he turn and start walking towards his house, holding his abdomen, situation diffused, self-defense manifest. Here's the problem. While he's making that statement to the police about Kyle bum-rushing him despite having a gun out, continuing to take an assaultive stance and attitude after being shot in the face, there's an investigation going on. The rest of the Rochester PD is back down at the scene, assessing evidence. You can see the crawling smear of blood, not standing, not walking, and more importantly, they get surveillance tape. They get surveillance tape in the middle of this interview with Jason. And somewhere in the middle of this interview, detectives Garston and Flathers are actually informed. They take a break and they go out. And what do they see? They see one of the videos from 43 that catches it. They also police have also obtained the driveway video from 41 that goes from the back, that shed out. They obtained the video from the corner, high corner down into the driveway. They obtained the video from the porch, and they obtained the video from 43. Pretty much a panorama. They also obtained a video from 38 down the street that just captures audio, that 5-second pause between shot 1 and 2. But here's the deal. None of these videos are perfect, but together with the scene and the interlocking nature of it, here's what you can absolutely see, is that Kyle comes out, just as Jason says, and they're nose to nose for a very brief period of time, a couple of seconds. You can't hear this audio of their account, which is notable because it captures, for instance, the discharge of a firearm. So whatever's being said isn't being said at such a volume that the audio can pick it up. And yet you see Kyle walk away after this nose-to-nose encounter, gesturing at the snow, and he walks further towards his house, and he turns and takes several steps back, and then Jason steps away from his vehicle with a firearm and advances 1-2 steps towards Kyle. He pulls the gun, and what do you see? You see him charging towards him, continuing to, attack an armed man now? No. You see Kyle stop cold in his tracks. There is a pause. Tick-tock. Nobody moves. Kyle then moves and clearly turns away, back towards his house, and that is when you can see in one video a muzzle flash and hear the firearm and see Kyle go to the ground. The brandishing worked. It's visible in the video. The first shot fully incapacitates him. He drops to the ground. He's on his side. He takes additional shots. You can see the defendant advance towards him, so 3, 4, 5 steps. Aim over him, from behind, into his back, his buttocks, his testicle, his abdomen, his shoulder, all shot. He never got up, never advanced, as Jason claimed to police. And so the injuries are what I described them to be. The videos show something very, very different than what Jason claimed to the police, to create circumstances that would justify this kind of behavior. The defense has taken these videos and they've sort of put them together in what they term as an enhancement. I'm going to ask you to carefully look at each one of these videos as they're introduced into evidence, and when you have an opportunity back there to really take a look at even shadow movements confirming that he stopped and turned. The tree, seeing just him coming forward and then turning and stepping back. These reference points all come together to show that this shooting was absolutely unnecessary and wholly unjustified. And so now we reach a different point in this path. They intersect again. Kyle and Jason's paths intersect here. And it may sound corny, but this intersection is called justice. The direction you take forward on this path, because it's now primarily your path to take, will be determined by the evidence, the law, and your common sense. You apply these principles, these values, and to not just the expectations, but the requirements on the street of how we deal with threats, with words. We'll ask you at the end of this case to find that this shooting was an attempted murder and a horrible assault that was criminal. Further ask that you not let this process confuse the notion of violent and deadly retribution, reaction with self-defense. Speaking angry words, without the deadly means to actually cause imminent deadly force are two different things. Brandishing the firearm in this case worked, stopped him for all these reasons. We're going to come back at the end of this case and ask you to apply those three principles: the law, the evidence, and your common sense, and return verdicts, just verdicts, guilty.
Thank you, counsel. Attorney Sisti?